This is Gender in Focus. I'm Elle, and each week I sit down with the president of Transfocus Consulting and all-round gender diversity genius, Kai Scott. I get to ask all the questions you've ever wanted to ask about how to make the workplace and the world a better place for trans and non-binary people. Let's get into it.
Today, we're tackling a tough one, Dave Chappelle's stand-up comedy and how it has framed trans people, especially trans women, in ways that fuel misunderstanding and frankly do harm. For some, Chappelle's jokes are seen as a sharp social commentary or just humor pushing boundaries. For others, they're a painful reminder of how trans people's identity are still seen as punchlines. And let's be honest, many folks watching his specials may have nodded along to some of the arguments. Isn't gender just biology? Aren't trans people just choosing how they want to be seen? Why can't we joke about everyone equally? We're here to explore those questions, not to push back, but to unpack where those beliefs come from and why they don't hold up when we look closer. So whether you've felt hurt by these jokes, laughed at them, or just aren't sure what the big deal is, we invite you to stick with us. We'll explore the impact of humor, the realities of gender identity, and what it means to balance comedy, free speech, and responsibility. And I'm joined by my colleague, Elle, to help us unpack these issues here today. How are you doing, Elle?
I'm doing so well, thank you, Kai. How are you?
I'm fantastic, too. I'm really excited to dive into this one. I know it's been a while since Dave Chappelle's stand-up comedies have come out, but it is something that keeps coming up. And so it's actually just a useful tool to look closer at issues that are percolating. He's just kind of the tip of an iceberg of which there's stuff below.
Yeah, trans people are often used as the butt of a joke, and we see it with multiple different comedians, but I think Dave Chappelle is just one that keeps being shared and reshared across different social media platforms or wherever it is. So I do think it's probably quite important to talk about. Could you explain what exactly Dave Chappelle said he said multiple things, but in the kind of the themes that he's been sharing and why it's such an issue and why it was so sensitive for so many people?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I will not go into all of the nitty-gritty detail. I'll spare that for folks who want to see the exact word for word. For those who want to, you don't have to if you don't want to. And also just being sensitive towards trans people who have heard it and don't want to relive all of that. But I'll speak to it broadly. There's been, and it's not just been one stand-up comedy, it's been a series of stand-up comedies where he has spoken about trans people, about trans issues. And essentially the gist of it is essentially that he doesn't want to participate in trans people's delusion, according to him, right? And he feels like he should be given the freedom to say what he wants and not to be imposed upon. And he gives various jokes to get at that general theme. And one of them being about an actor, Jim Carrey in particular, who is getting into a character and is living that character for a movie. And so he uses this as an analogy to get at why he doesn't want to participate, and essentially is calling being trans being an act, right? And he wants to meet the real person, which is, in his mind, related, and he speaks frequently about bodies, especially trans bodies, and so is getting at this particular aspect. And it's something that, some trans people can listen to and be like, kind of eye roll. Other trans people might feel very stirred or activated or triggered by that kind of thing, mainly because it's kind of on repeat. Dave's not the only one who's coming up with this, not original content by any stretch. And essentially it's just like, yet again, especially with someone such a high profile and such intelligence. That's the thing, especially for myself as somebody who has listened to Dave Chappelle for years. He is a very intelligent and insightful person and has used comedy to really illustrate the struggle and the need for support on other topics. And so it feels off that he's not able to reach that on this, on gender diversity.
What would you say are the sort of main misunderstandings that come from that? Because you were talking about how his jokes, in particular, around wanting to see the real person and that it's an act. That's sort of in complete contrast to the realities of trans experience.
Yeah. So when he was unpacking his joke or telling his joke related to visiting Jim Carrey and wanting to meet Jim Carrey, but instead, because he was method acting and living
Mm,
100% of the time as the character he was playing, he was upset that he was only meeting the character, not Jim Carrey, in that moment. And that was, I'm sure there was, I can't remember the exact,
mhm,
punchline in that, but that was the gist of it. And it's really interesting that that's a very common misunderstanding. That's not just Dave Chappelle. That's often what cisgender people think of trans people, that we're putting on an act and
mhm,
presenting it to the world and then wanting the world to, essentially reflect that back. When in fact, it's actually the direct opposite of that, right? The
mhm,
fact that for years we put on an act trying to be the thing that society tells us we are, uh, based on what we were born. They just kind of ascribe that and are like, this is you. It's like, ooh, I don't think so. And so you try your best, or many trans and non binary folks do make a really valiant attempt at what society says we are, but doesn't feel resonant or true. And so it's really quite interesting that, Dave and others misunderstand that. And really the earnest year long, decades long effort that people put into that,
mhm,
and that's the facade that, if we're living by what society expects, we are actually acting. And the meeting the true self is when people are able to step out of that and say, actually, that does not either quite fit or fully fit, and here's who I actually am. And it
mhm,
comes at a great expense, often hard fought, whether an internal struggle to make that visible or losses in one's life. It's not something that's cavalier and at a flip of a switch. And so people go to extraordinary lengths, if they choose to take gender affirming care routes, transformations to their body. So it's just like, yeah, just I think he misses the point that the act is before we come out rather than after
mhm,
it. And so it's just really interesting. And also that there's a cost to that act before we come out, in terms of depression, isolating oneself, even substance abuse, despair, like deep amounts of despair. So there's a
mhm,
cost to acting over the long term. So
mhm.
that's just some of the dimensions where it's just he kind of points to trans people being at putting on an act when in fact it's the opposite.
Why are these so harmful? Because they are harmful and they have been, it's been discussed a lot and it's sort of dismissed quite a lot as sort of being over dramatic, but or like it's just comedy. It's just like, why can't we just all have a joke? Why is this such a big deal? Okay.
Yeah, it's really important to explore because, of course, jokes can create a lot of levity in life. And so it's not that we're avoiding all jokes, even jokes about trans people. But it's just what is the nature of the joke and what's
Mhm,
its basis. And in this case, it is pretty far off of what the actual trans experience is. And so it's actually replicating harmful misunderstandings about trans folks,
mhm,
where already society struggles with understanding trans people, and it kind of reaffirms biases or hurtful or harmful ways of looking at trans folks that essentially they're making it up, right?
mhm,
And that's already pretty strong hold in society. And basically, when Dave Chappelle and others like him, make these types of jokes, there's almost like a permission structure that's built to say, yeah, hey, even Dave Chappelle thinks that, and yeah, he's right, and we're right, and those trans people are out to lunch, right? And it's just
mhm,
like, well, rather than being honest. And I think there's lots of space for trans people to to hear from cisgender people, including Dave Chappelle, like, I'm struggling with this. I don't quite get it. I'm stuck here. I can't get past it. And he could even kind of make fun of himself in that process in a way that I think would be really helpful to people who are also struggling on the topic. So it's not avoiding the topic, it's just like how you do it that can either bring us together and along a pathway, or can pit people against each other in a way that hurts and harms and pulls us further apart. And so, especially since I know Dave Chappelle's comedy and know its power, I'm just like I'm just sad and disappointed really by the trajectory it's very different from his other comedy, because when he speaks to race, like, he's very powerful, very insightful, very incisive. Obviously, coming from his own lived experience, he can know those nuances and play with them in a very tangible and constructive way. But that's not where he is with trans issues, and even to some extent on queer or sexual diversity as well. He just kind of likes to the kind of colloquial way of talking about is punch down, right? Because he does have power in this instance, given the reach, the audience, and it's not. I don't subscribe to the he's responsible angle, but there is something to be said about being thoughtful and almost strategic, right? Because like he has his own experience of being a minority and could stretch from his own understanding to understand some aspects of trans issues, and for whatever reason hasn't done that. I don't know if it's laziness or just can't be bothered, or is beyond that now. I don't know. It's interesting.
Maybe it's more effective for his career. I'd like not to be
True.
cynical, but
Yeah, that could be
you know what I
aspect of
mean.
that. Create some controversy. It's easy. It's low cost to punch down on trans people, sadly. Um, but it's interesting because there's been this whole wave of comedy around either by trans people or about trans people that is like really awesome. Like, there's so many examples now where if Chappelle was inclined to, he could have gone down those pathways and like been constructive. It's not
Right.
to say that you have to have it all figured out or you have to have 100% dialed. Like, there's no expectation, or not no, but few people expect that.
Yeah.
But it's when it's just like, yeah, not being bothered. It's like, okay. And many attempts were made to, he did engage with trans community members afterwards to try to understand or have dialogue, but that didn't seem to, you know, shift anything. It just kind of, he doubled down, right?
Yeah, from the stuff that I read feels a bit intellectually dishonest, the way that he's
Mm,
handling it from that point onwards, where
yeah,
it just feels like he has all of this information right at his fingertips and he's actively not choosing to
yeah,
use
yeah.
it.
And going back to stuff, to like old easy stuff, like, I'm going to use pronouns based on how somebody looks. Done. Okay, cool.
Sure. Right.
Awesome. And
Yeah. Good. Good for you.
no, it's not awesome. I'm being facetious, but just like, okay, that, everybody gets to choose. People do have freedom, and that's, a choice he's made, and maybe others as well. But, that does not serve to get anybody closer, unfortunately, in this scenario. So, and there's more elements to this story that I don't feel the need to bring into this conversation. But there's a lot more here, because I know some trans people might be listening to it and be like, what about this? What about,
Yeah, yeah.
to keep it kind of a more simple conversation, we'll just stick to this. But if people are curious, they can go a little bit further to find to your intellectual dishonesty point. There is that aspect too. So there's more to it than we're talking about here today.
For
But
sure.
it's an important one because recognizing that many are where Dave Chappelle is, and a bit stuck, right? And so just using this as an opportunity, Dave might be stuck, but others don't need to be if they don't want to be. Yeah.
You've spoken just then about his sort of platform and the size of his audience.
Mm,
And in contrast, there isn't really a trans person who is on that scale when it comes to comedy and making jokes. So
mm,
a lot of the time, I guess people are getting their information directly from Dave Chappelle about the trans community.
yeah,
And I suppose that's where this blocker is for a lot of people, is that they've only really heard one narrative.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point that if there was a comparable, you know, trans version of Dave Chappelle, Davida Chappelle, um, then, perhaps there would be some balance there where,
Mhm.
there could be a bit of jostling to have that. But there's none of that. There are trans comedians, but they don't have nearly the reach that he does.
Mhm.
Certainly, I'm sure they're working on it and would like and want that reach. And we can help
Mhm.
them have that reach by supporting them, looking at their comedy and liking and subscribing, all the good stuff that helps them, and going to their shows and whatnot. So definitely plugging and encouraging people to go and Google trans comedians. But yeah, there's nobody there to give a counterpoint or humanize the issue by showcasing comedians. And as I was mentioning, like, trans comedians, they make fun of themselves in a way that brings people together rather than tears them apart.
Mhm.
So it's just this really beautiful balance that people strike. And they could talk about real stuff. They can talk about, gender affirming care and, you know,
Mhm.
being perceived at this or being misgendered or, whatever the case may be. And that humor allows people much more insight into that lived experience. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of value. And as I was mentioning, cisgender people can joke about trans people, and
Mhm.
it can be done really effectively in a way that still is like edgy. People think,
Right.
oh, there's going to be no edge. It's like, no, actually, it gets us to think and stretch and imagine and just be, yeah, more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there is that kind of, oh, we can't joke about anything anymore. People are too
Yeah.
sensitive. But like you can absolutely can joke about trans people. It just doesn't have to be vicious. You
Yeah.
don't have to lean into the sort of stereotypes and the way that it can negatively affect trans people.
Yeah, and there's also sometimes a crudeness too,
Hmm.
like in some aspects, and I won't say it word for word, but Dave Chappelle references trans bodies, in a way that just makes it seem grotesque, and
Right.
you could tell that he has a disdain, and while trying to also be quote progressive, like this very weird mixture concoction where I'm just like, I don't even know where to kind of
Hmm.
listen and lean, and where are we. It's very confusing to
Hmm.
participate in that. And certainly some trans people have stopped listening to Dave Chappelle, and others may still be continuing, right?
Hmm.
Everybody can make their own choices around that. That's important. Not to judge somebody if they do, and it's okay if they don't, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, this crudeness that I know some people like that kind of comedy, and it's for those who it's good for, it's fine. But it's one thing to kind of, yeah, pick apart somebody's body as a way to
Hmm.
say, oh, you're real or not, is
Right.
very kind of gross at the
For
bottom
sure.
of the at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, and trans bodies are so scrutinized in pretty much every aspect of
Yeah.
the world and
Hmm.
life and in media and pretty much everywhere. So to then have it a joke as well is just really brutal,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
icky.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of this about the joke in particular that you were sort of referencing to, that trans people are choosing their gender.
Hmm.
What is the reality of that?
Hmm. Right. Choosing. So, yeah, there's many, including Dave Chappelle, think that it's a choice, right?
Mm,
That somebody is like, maybe even flippantly, like one day wakes up and is just like, I want to be this. And so I'm going to do this, right?
mhm,
And that it's like a thing you strive for, maybe you miss a bit, or maybe you're really good at it, but you're still fooling people, right?
Mm.
This concept of like fooling people is a very big theme, and sometimes
Yeah.
that's even a response to people who look how society expects for their gender. And when somebody shares that they're trans, people are incredulous, like, what? I would have never
Hmm.
guessed, right? Things like
Right.
this, that the subtext being you that's not who you are, that's who you're,
Hmm.
what you're putting on. Yeah, it's not the case for many trans people. The language that they use, or myself included, I am that, right? It's not
Hmm.
something I'm going after. It's something that is being revealed. It's
Right.
something that was always there. Maybe I had to take a minute to figure it out, because there's a lot of layers I had to take off of what it is that I am at my
Hmm.
core. And a lot of it being messages that, if you hear kind of 1,000 times over years, that just kind of cakes onto you, and so you have to take off those layers to be able to be oneself. And so there's
Hmm.
effort involved, but it's not striving for something, it's already there inside, it's presenting it. So I think that is a thing that is really hard for people to realize. But when they do, especially cisgender people, can reflect on, like, how do I know my gender? Sometimes they point to
Hmm.
different things to affirm that. But
Hmm.
even if you didn't have those things, you'd still be your gender. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's where you don't have to point to anything. You just are that. And so that's why it's so tricky when people say, well, what is a woman? What is a man? And it's just like, fish don't know they're swimming in water. It just is,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
it's a bit tricky to explain. And certainly it's okay to lean on things outside, right, that
Hmm.
resonate, but it's still it's still very much an internal thing, and it's there. And that includes gender fluidity too, right? That that movement is authentic and always there. And it's just a matter of always becoming.
Hmm. So you've talked about how some people who find this topic quite hurtful, quite harmful, maybe stop listening to Dave Chappelle altogether, but others might still listen and still kind of enjoy his comedy, aside presumably from the stuff about trans people. Where is that balance? Can you still enjoy that kind of edgy or challenging comedy while still holding people accountable?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean, I think the people who are still watching Dave Chappelle's or any other comedian who's punching down on trans people, because they're a handful, Dave's not the only one,
Hmm.
is that they can be witness to what is happening, right? Perhaps things will change, right?
Hmm.
The heat's off of Dave Chappelle. He showed that he could survive, right? He thought he would be canceled, but he wasn't, right?
Right.
Netflix continued to platform and showcase his stuff. And so, for those who stick around, perhaps they can be witness to something that changes and find out what was the pathway, because
Hmm.
nobody's ever done, right?
Hmm.
It might feel hopeless, but perhaps there's something that shifts based on who knows what. And so they can see that evolution or report on if things continue to be the same,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I think there is value in people who feel that they can do that, right? For
Hmm.
me, it's always a matter of capacity. What's my capacity? And actually, it varies day to day. So
Hmm.
sometimes I could have capacity for a little bit of Dave Chappelle. Um,
Sure.
Now, that said, I do find myself on edge, right? Anytime
Mm.
now that I listen to him, I'm kind of bracing for, not so
Yeah.
pleasant, maybe even awful stuff, all in the name of edgy comedy or free to say anything I want comedy. Um,
Hmm.
and so, yeah, it's not as pleasant of an experience anymore. Again, I really appreciate his insights on and really showcasing, especially to white America, issues of race.
Hmm.
There were some brilliant ones that I just, mind blown in terms of the genius of how he set that all up with the
Hmm.
punchline just perfectly delivered for white people to really take a look, right? Because
Hmm.
some white people don't want to look at
Right, for sure, yeah.
issues of racism, and so you can't do a direct approach. So he did another approach, and anyways, I could go on.
Hmm. Sure.
Now that said, the others choose not to, and that's a very understandable. We want to, some people need to preserve their energy, and they don't want to apply it or give attention or money to somebody who is actively still harming trans people, or not willing to look at what he's doing or take accountability. And
Hmm.
that's also a fair approach as well. So I think any pathway somebody chooses is right for them and is yielding some benefit to what we're undertaking here. So I think it's also important not to kind of tell each other what to do on this, right? It's such
Yes.
a personal thing and a very sensitive one too, right? Especially, I think, some cisgender people coming from a good place might say, "Hey, are you sure you want to listen to Dave Chappelle to a trans person?" Right? We don't want to kind of
Yeah.
get involved like that. Um, Certainly, if a trans person is upset and wants to talk through why something was challenging, that they listen to
Hmm.
Dave or any other comedian, certainly that's okay. But yeah, that's some of my thoughts on how to navigate some of that. And I think there is a way to balance listening with keeping him responsible or keeping
Hmm.
in dialogue
For sure.
in terms of the impact. So that,
Hmm.
because oftentimes people can just be like, oh, there really wasn't any issue if people aren't raising it. But if people
Hmm.
are, and of course, how you do it helps too, right? If you invite somebody in rather than, you know, calling them out, that can make a difference. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's
No, for sure.
important.
You've mentioned this a couple of times about that kind of, I can't remember the way you worded it, but is that kind of freedom of expression.
Mm.
And there are some people who believe that the whole point of a comedian is to push these boundaries and to kind of speak to current events in that way, and make people look at them, as you were talking about with race, make people see them in a different way. And so that's the kind of whole point of some people's comedy.
Yeah.
So where is that line?
Yes. And I want to say I'm not a comedian. So I appreciate there is a craft, right? And anytime
Sure.
kind of lay people get involved and start telling comedians how to do their comedy, that
Mhm.
probably is not the greatest direction. Um, so I just want to preface all of what I'm about to say with that, because I don't want, or nor do I think other trans people want to get involved in like breaking down and like,
Yeah.
micromanaging comedians, right? That's just not the case. But
Hmm.
I do think there's something to be said about, and there is room for comedy to illustrate and to highlight and to bring to the surface what is sometimes beneath the surface. A
Hmm.
lot up to date, trans stuff was underneath the surface and it was bubbling there and it wasn't quite visible. People didn't feel safe, understandably. And so now it's burst forth in the scene, and comedy is one way of wrestling with that to
Hmm.
help integrate it into everyday life. And society in general, and kind of update things. And so there is definitely a role for comedy. And sometimes that does involve discomfort, and discomfort is important. And it's not just cisgender discomfort, but it's also sometimes trans
Hmm.
discomfort in that as well. But the way that I see comedy, or what kind of comedy I'm drawn to, is one that is seeking to be constructive. Like, it's not trying to resolve things, because I don't think that's the role of the comedian. They're not
Hmm.
problem solvers. They're
Sure.
problem surfacers, But if it's just about replicating what's already there, that's actually not adding anything. It's just kind of echoing. You're
It's
like,
lazy too.
it's
It's,
so lazy. It's
yeah.
that I'm like, you can do way better. And maybe you
Hmm.
have to like take some time with it and build towards something. I don't know. I don't know the techniques, but like, workshop it a bit
Hmm.
to where you can refine it. But this like taking a shortcut to like the basic bare already regurgitated thoughts that society
Hmm.
has about a topic, no matter what it is, trans being one of them, but there's so many others. It's like, really? That's it?
Hmm.
I guess I expect more of comedians
No,
and
I agree with you
yeah.
though. I definitely agree with that because there is something about comedy. I really love comedy, and I love the
Mhm.
way that people play with it, and especially when it's really intelligent or really clever, and they can use
Yeah.
comedy to showcase that. But when it's just no different to what I could hear at the pub, you know
Right.
what I mean? Like
True.
it's but you've got this whole platform, and you've got all this money and wealth for what? Like to just replicate something my uncle might say. That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's crazy to me.
Oh my gosh, you put it so well. I mean, I'm kind of gobsmacked. That's where I land. Especially it's money and time for me. Like
Hmm.
you have the time and space because I mean Dave Chappelle and other comedians who have made it. Like, sure, there's other things that I'm sure you're responsible for, but you actually have time to like really go deep in a way
Hmm.
that you could be super creative and really interesting and like even unlock things in people's
Hmm.
minds. Not to say that everything's solved unlocking, but more that it allows for another step to come for in a way that even surprises trans people. Like I
Hmm.
love to be surprised when like a cisgender person have like this beautiful, interesting insight where I'm like, oh my gosh, yes.
Hmm.
And it's like a collective endeavor around figuring out gender because it's a bit of a mystery and a bit of a mess for
Hmm.
everybody. And so, like, why not add another layer of trans to other things that are being wrestled and sorted out? So,
Hmm.
and of course, there'll be diversity in the types of comedians that are out there, and that's okay too. And some will be drawn to different types of comedians, but I guess the like crude, crass, and for no purpose except because I want to say what I want to say. I don't know. Feels very empty.
Hmm. I agree. What would you say that, let's say there are people in the past that have found these jokes really funny and have really enjoyed them,
Mm,
and then kind of later on have realized the impact of that and
mm.
just feel a bit uncomfortable about that. How can allies or growing allies, developing allies move on from that and grow from that?
That's really potent, and some people feel ashamed of that, and
Hmm.
I appreciate that they might want to hide what
Hmm.
they did in the past, and be like, "Ooh, hope nobody knows about that," and I'm just going to cover it
Yeah.
up, sweep it under the cover, and just walk away and be like, "That's the past. I'm new now." But I
Hmm.
actually would invite people to share that story. It's very powerful when folks
Hmm.
laughed at one time, came to an understanding, whatever that is, and then are like, I don't, I'm doing things differently. And for people to know that trajectory, that can be helpful to somebody who is perhaps still at the I find this funny stage.
Hmm.
And for somebody to connect to be like, yeah, I found that funny too. In fact, I sought that out and just ate it up and, felt very self righteous. And then, I met a trans person or I saw this
Hmm.
YouTube or I read this article or whatever the case. And then I started to realize X, Y, and Z. And I did not understand the what I was joking about and why I
Hmm.
found it funny and just like unpacking it for them
For
so
sure.
that there's connection around that they laughed at it. Um,
Hmm.
but then also allowing that a bridge to something else or something newer or something better can
Hmm.
help them. Not to say that you're going to convince them immediately, but even
For
just
sure.
planting a seed can be really helpful. So rather than shying away from what you used to do, I actually invite people to share with those who do continue to find that funny.
Often I think people have this like idea of there's like the holier than thou and the like people at the bottom who don't understand, and I'm going to like lean over and lecture you. But actually if you can you know what I mean, if you
Yeah,
can explain where you've been and how you've also made these similar mistakes, or you've been in the same situation and now you're not, it's not like I'm going to lecture you, it's like we can go somewhere with this.
yeah, yeah. or just have a dialogue about it to at least see a different perspective. Because
Hmm.
oftentimes people are operating in silos and they're not exposed to another way of looking at something,
Hmm.
or realizing something is harmful or could be harmful to someone, and connecting in an empathetic, understanding, supportive way can actually help people be like, oh yeah, that would be gross
Hmm.
if I heard that about
Sure.
myself or about a loved one or whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
people can connect dots, maybe not right in the moment, maybe later, but it is very powerful and helpful storytelling. We do have a resource because joking feels to some inaccessible, especially in the workplace. People are nervous. And, when it comes to gender diversity, especially, people are shy. And so just, adding a few parameters for consideration. It's not meant to, it's not a do's and don'ts. It's not
Hmm.
prescriptive, but just more understanding what can and what's possible, and maybe some things to avoid, so that especially if you don't know somebody very well, you're not kind of off course with them. So there is a place for joking. It's just how you do it. And here's a few tips and tools on how to be kind of landing on one side or the other of that equation. So hopefully that's helpful, and just allows people to relax a little bit more so that they can genuinely embrace joking with confidence.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you as well. And bye for now.